Boston, Massachusetts, March 17, 1987. The demolition crew had been working on the old Mechanics Hall annex for 3 weeks when Roberto Martinez's sledgehammer broke through something that wasn't supposed to be there. The building at 447 Huntington Avenue was scheduled for complete renovation. Built in 1864, it had served as a concert venue, meeting hall, and storage facility for various organizations over 123 years. Now a development company planned to convert it into luxury apartments. Roberto was demolishing the basement east wall when his hammer punched through what he'd assumed was solid brick. Instead of resistance, he felt emptiness, a hollow space. "Mike, get over here," he called to his foreman. "We got a void." They widened the hole with careful strikes. Behind 3 layers of brick, each from different construction periods, was a sealed chamber approximately 8 feet wide, 6 feet deep, and 10 feet tall. No door, no windows, just deliberate concealment. Inside, a wooden trunk. The trunk measured roughly 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, 18 inches deep. Heavy iron hinges, rusted but intact. No lock, just a simple leather strap closure that had deteriorated with age. Mike Torres, the site foreman, made the call he was legally required to make. Historical buildings under renovation in Boston required archaeological review if anything unusual was discovered. This qualified as unusual. Dr. Catherine Reeves from the Massachusetts Historical Commission arrived 90 minutes later. She was a specialist in 19th century American history, particularly New England cultural artifacts. She'd spent 15 years examining everything from colonial-era pottery to Civil War correspondence. This find immediately triggered her professional curiosity. The trunk sat in the sealed chamber, untouched for an unknown period. The chamber itself showed deliberate construction, brick laid in a pattern consistent with 1860s, 1870s masonry. Someone had built this space specifically to hide something, then sealed it permanently. "Don't touch anything else," Catherine instructed the crew. "This is a preservation site now." She photographed the chamber from multiple angles, documented the brick patterns, measured dimensions. Then, wearing protective gloves, she carefully examined the trunk's exterior. The wood was oak, age-darkened but structurally sound. The leather strap crumbled at her touch. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be oilcloth, papers, lots of papers. Catherine worked methodically. Each item was photographed in situ before removal. The trunk contained 247 individual documents organized in deliberate stacks tied with string. Stack 1. Sheet music. Handwritten musical compositions, approximately 200 pages. The notation was precise, professional. Classical staves filled with notes, but the rhythmic patterns were unusual. Complex syncopations that didn't match standard European classical structure. Marginal notes in tight handwriting. African call pattern, repeat 3x. Senegalese rhythm variation, Creole counterpoint. Stack 2. Letters. 16 pieces of correspondence dated between 1842 and 1889. All signed LG or Lucian Gaines. Some addressed to individuals with initials only, to MW, Philadelphia, for EC, New York, Brother FD, Rochester. The content was coded, careful. References to packages arriving safely, the journey completed successfully, our network expanding. Stack 3, a leather-bound journal, 340 pages of dense handwriting. The first entry dated August 3, 1823. The final entry, November 12, 1891. Stack 4, concert programs, 23 printed programs from venues across the Northeast, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Providence, Hartford. The Traveling Harmonic Ensemble presents An Evening of Musical Excellence. Dates ranging from 1843 to 1887. Each program listed performers by initials only. LG. Was always listed as Musical Director. Stack 5. Financial Ledgers. Detailed accounting of concert revenues, expenses, and educational disbursements. Total documented income over 44 years. $287,450. An extraordinary sum for the period. Stack 6. A single daguerreotype photograph in a protective case. The image showed a black man in formal Victorian attire, seated with a violin, staring directly at the camera. The intensity of his gaze was arresting. On the back, engraved, L.G. Boston, 1853. The truth preserved. Catherine sat on the basement floor, surrounded by documents, and understood she was looking at something significant. Very significant. The journal provided immediate context. The opening pages described a New Orleans plantation, a boy named Lucien learning European classical music to entertain his enslavers' guests, secretly documenting African musical traditions his parents had taught him. Later entries described escape, arrival in Boston, the establishment of a false identity, and something extraordinary, an underground network disguised as a concert series. The performances served two purposes, one journal entry read. First, they generate income to fund freedom. Second, they provide cover for movement. A traveling ensemble is expected to change members, to relocate, to appear in different cities. No one questions musicians on the road. Our audiences believe they support classical education. They don't realize they're financing revolution. Catherine read until darkness forced her to stop. Then she made phone calls. By March 20th, a full archaeological team was on site. By March 25th, the story had reached the Boston Globe. Hidden archive discovered, evidence of Underground Railroad musical network. By April 1st, researchers from Harvard, MIT, and the Berklee College of Music were examining the musical compositions. The verdict was unanimous. These weren't copies of known works. These were original compositions blending African rhythmic complexity with European harmonic structure. Proto-jazz, written decades before jazz was officially invented. The letters, when decoded, revealed a network spanning 6 states and involving at least 200 individuals. The packages referenced weren't merchandise. They were people. Escaped enslaved people being moved through a system that used concert tours as cover. The financial ledgers showed meticulous accounting. Concert revenues funded education, a code word for providing escaped individuals with skills training, housing assistance, and business capital. The documented disbursements matched almost exactly with the documented establishment of dozens of black-owned businesses across the northern states between 1845 and 1890. And the man in the photograph, Lucien Gaines, had been completely absent from historical records. No census listings under that name, no property records, no official documentation, until now. Catherine Reeves held a press conference on April 15, 1987. "We've discovered evidence of one of the most sophisticated resistance operations in American history," she announced. "A man who used music as both art and weapon, who created a network that saved lives and built economic power, and who documented everything, then sealed it away." Someone asked why Gaines would hide this archive instead of publishing his story. Catherine had found the answer in the journal's final entry, dated November 12, 1891. "I am 78 years old. The network no longer operates. It is no longer needed. But the people I helped remain vulnerable. Former slave catchers have become police. Discrimination is everywhere. If this archive were discovered now, it would endanger those I sought to protect. So I seal it, not forever, but until America is ready to hear what it reveals, that enslaved people possessed genius their oppressors denied, that resistance took forms white America never recognized. That culture itself was a battlefield, and we fought with music as our weapon. When these documents emerge, and they will, let them prove what we always knew. We were never what they claimed we were. The archive was never meant to be hidden forever, just hidden until its discovery wouldn't endanger the living. In 1987, that time had finally come. New Orleans, Louisiana, 1823-1842. The first thing Lucien remembered was rhythm, not melody, not harmony, not the formal structure his father would later teach him. Just rhythm, his mother's hands clapping a pattern while she worked in the kitchen house of the Devereaux plantation. 3 quick beats, 1 slow, 2 quick, pause. African call and response translated into sound without words. Lucien was born August 3, 1823, in the quarters behind the main house. His mother, Aminata, had been brought from Senegal in 1815. His father, Jacques, was Creole, born enslaved in Louisiana, taught French and music by missionaries who believed Christian education would make enslaved people more obedient. It had the opposite effect. Jacques played violin for Monsieur Devereux's parties. European classical music, Mozart, Haydn, Vivaldi. The plantation owner enjoyed displaying his cultured, enslaved musician to guests, proof of his refined taste. What Devereux didn't know was that Jacques embedded African rhythms into European compositions, subtle syncopations that sounded like mistakes to untrained ears, but were deliberate preservation of the music his mother had taught him. Lucien showed musical aptitude at age 4. By 6, he was accompanying his father at parties, playing simple melodies on a child-sized violin Devereux had commissioned specifically for this purpose. The guests found it charming, a miniature enslaved musician performing classical works. They applauded politely, never realizing the child was memorizing every composition he heard, analyzing structure, understanding harmonic progressions that would take conservatory students years to master. At night, in the quarters, Jacques and Aminata taught Lucien the real lessons. "The masters think our music is primitive," Jacques explained when Lucien was 9. "They hear African drumming and call it savage rhythm. But listen." He played a complex polyrhythmic pattern, 3 separate rhythms layered over each other, each independent but combining into something European music theory had no framework to analyze. "This is mathematics. This is architecture built from sound. They don't hear it because they never learned to listen for it." Aminata sang traditional Senegalese songs, teaching Lucien the call and response patterns that predated European musical notation by centuries. "These songs survived the ocean," she told him. "They survived because we carried them in our memories. Music is how we remember who we are." Lucien absorbed everything: European classical training from Devereux's music teachers, African traditions from his parents. By age 12, he could play Mozart flawlessly while understanding exactly how to incorporate Senegalese rhythmic patterns into the harmonic structure without the white listeners noticing. He also began documenting. Jacques had taught him to read and write, dangerous skills for an enslaved child, but necessary ones. Lucien started keeping a journal, writing in French, hiding the pages in a gap between floor joists under his sleeping mat. He transcribed traditional African rhythms using European musical notation, creating the first written records of music that had only existed orally. He wrote detailed analyses of compositions he performed, noting how African and European structures could merge. "The European harmony provides the vessel," he wrote at age 14. "The African rhythm provides the spirit. Together they create something neither tradition alone can achieve. This is the music of survival." By 1837, Lucien was performing regularly at Devereux's gatherings. At 14, he looked older, tall, composed, able to play complex classical repertoire flawlessly. Wealthy New Orleans society heard him and marveled at how civilized an enslaved musician could become with proper training. They never asked if he created any music himself. The assumption was that enslaved people could imitate European culture but never innovate. Lucien used their assumptions as cover. He began composing secretly, writing original pieces that blended classical form with African rhythmic complexity. European staves filled with notes that followed Haydn's harmonic rules, but embedded Senegalese call and response patterns into the melody. He showed these compositions to no one, hiding them with his journal. In 1838, something changed. A white musician from Boston visited Devereux's plantation. Charles Morrison was a piano teacher and composer, traveling through the South studying regional folk music. He heard Lucien perform and immediately recognized something unusual. After the party, Morrison approached Jacques. "Your son isn't just playing these pieces," he said. "He's reimagining them. The rhythmic variations. Those aren't standard interpretations." Jacques remained guarded. Praise from white visitors was often prelude to something worse. But Morrison was different. "I've studied African musical traditions," he continued quietly, careful not to be overheard. "I've heard similar rhythmic patterns in Congo Square Sunday gatherings. Your son is synthesizing traditions. That's not imitation. That's innovation." Over the next 3 weeks, Morrison visited the quarters several times, always after Devereux had gone to sleep. He listened to Lucien play his original compositions. He examined the journal, reading Lucien's theoretical analyses of musical fusion. "This is extraordinary work," Morrison told Lucian after reviewing 40 pages of compositions. "You understand music at a level most conservatory graduates never reach. You're documenting the creation of something entirely new." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "But you know Devereaux would claim ownership of everything you've created. If these compositions were ever published, they'd be attributed to him, not you. Your genius would be erased." Lucian knew. He'd watched his father's innovations credited to Devereaux for years. Morrison made an offer. "If you ever reach freedom, come to Boston. I teach at the New England Conservatory. I can't free you. I don't have that kind of wealth or influence. But if you escape, I can help you establish yourself as a musician under a new identity. Your work could be published under your own name." He left contact information, an address in Boston, a name to reference. Then he left Louisiana, and Lucian didn't see him again for 4 years. In 1840, Devereaux's financial situation deteriorated. Cotton prices declined, gambling debts accumulated. He began selling property, including enslaved people. On November 3, 1840, Devereaux announced he was selling Lucien to a plantation owner in Alabama. Price, $1,400. The buyer wanted a musician for his daughter's education. Lucien had 3 weeks before transfer. He spent those 3 weeks teaching. Every young enslaved person on Devereaux's plantation who showed any musical interest received secret instruction. Lucian taught them African rhythms his mother had taught him, showed them how to embed hidden patterns into European compositions, gave them copies of his journal pages, distributing his documentation across multiple people so the knowledge couldn't be erased by a single sale or death. "Remember," he told a group of 7 young musicians on his final night, "they think music is entertainment. They think we perform to please them. But music is memory. Music is identity. Every time you play, you're preserving something they can never take from us." On November 24, 1840, the night before his scheduled transfer, Lucian escaped. He took his most recent journal, 47 completed musical compositions, and the contact information Morrison had left. Everything else, the documentation distributed among other enslaved people, the musical knowledge embedded in the community, he left behind as insurance. If he died during escape, the work would survive. The journey north took 8 weeks. Lucian traveled mostly at night, using Underground Railroad contacts whose existence he'd learned about through whispered conversations in the quarters. He carried his journal and compositions wrapped in oilcloth, protecting them from rain and river crossings. He reached Boston on January 19, 1842. Age, 18. Status, fugitive. Resources, his music and his memory. Charles Morrison's address still functioned. Morrison was now 56, still teaching at the conservatory. He opened his door to find Lucian standing there in worn traveling clothes, carrying a weather-stained package of documents. "I remember," Morrison said simply. "Come inside." That night, Lucian became Lucian Gaines, the surname chosen from Morrison's suggestion, neutral and unremarkable. His past in New Orleans was buried beneath a new identity, a free black musician from Providence, classically trained, seeking opportunities in Boston's musical community. Morrison arranged lodging, made introductions, helped Lucian establish credibility without raising questions about his origins. Within 2 months, Lucian was giving private music lessons to wealthy Boston families who found it fashionable to employ a young black classical musician. But teaching wasn't his goal. Building an underground network was. Morrison connected Lucian with abolitionist circles. Through those connections, Lucian met organizers of the Underground Railroad, and he proposed something unusual, using concert tours as cover for moving escaped enslaved people from safe house to safe house. "Musical ensembles travel constantly," Lucian explained to a gathering of abolitionists in March 1842. "We perform in multiple cities, our personnel changes frequently, and no one questions musicians moving from place to place. An ensemble could have 10 members at one concert and 8 at the next. Audiences assume 2 musicians stayed in the previous city for other engagements. They wouldn't realize those musicians were actually escaped enslaved people being relocated. The proposal was audacious but logistically sound. Within months, Lucian organized his first concert tour under the name The Traveling Harmonic Ensemble. He recruited 4 other free black musicians and 2 escaped enslaved people who'd reached Boston through other networks. The ensemble performed in Boston, then Worcester, then Providence. By the time they reached Providence, the 2 escaped enslaved people had been settled with abolitionist families who provided employment and new identities. 2 different escaped people joined the ensemble in Providence for the continuation of the tour. The system worked because it was hidden in plain sight. Concert programs listed performers by initials only: LG, musical director; MW, violin; EC, piano. Audiences assumed the initials were modest professional discretion. They didn't realize the initials prevented identification if slave catchers investigated. Over 6 months in 1842, Lucian's ensemble moved 17 people from Boston to various northern cities. Each person was integrated into the free black community with employment, housing, and a new identity. None were captured. The concerts also generated revenue. European philanthropists attended these performances, hearing groundbreaking fusion of African and European musical traditions. They donated substantial funds, believing they supported classical music education for free black musicians. Those funds financed the network, paying for safe houses, travel expenses, emergency legal fees when needed. Lucian documented everything: names, by initials, dates, routes, amounts spent. The journal he'd started in New Orleans continued in Boston, now recording not just musical innovations but operational details of an underground network operating under cultural cover. By December 1842, Lucian Gaines had escaped slavery, established a legitimate musical career, and created a revolutionary system for moving people to freedom. He was 19 years old, and he was just beginning. By spring 1843, 15 months after arriving in Boston, Lucian Gaines had performed 73 concerts across 5 states and moved 32 escaped enslaved people into new identities in northern cities. The traveling harmonic ensemble had become exactly what he'd envisioned: a legitimate cultural institution that served as perfect cover for revolutionary activity. But maintaining dual operation, public musician, underground conductor, required meticulous organization. Every detail mattered. One mistake could expose the entire network. Lucian developed systematic protocols. Concert programs listed performers by initials to prevent identification: LG, musical director; MW, violin; EC, piano; JT, cello. If slave catchers investigated ensemble membership, they'd find only initials, no full names to trace. Ensemble composition changed frequently, but appeared natural. Musicians joined for 3-city tours, then accepted other engagements, while new performers arrived. Audiences expected this fluidity. Musicians were understood to have varied commitments. They didn't realize that performers who left the ensemble had actually been settled into new lives, while new musicians were often escaped people being relocated. Financial records appeared legitimate. Lucian documented every concert, every expense, every payment to musicians. European philanthropists who attended performances donated generously, believing they supported black classical music education. Those donations funded safe houses, travel expenses, legal fees, job training for people transitioning to freedom. The accounting was flawless. It would withstand scrutiny from tax collectors or suspicious authorities. But beneath the numbers was invisible infrastructure supporting systematic liberation. The musical repertoire itself contained coded information. Lucian programmed specific composers to communicate messages to Underground Railroad contacts in attendance. A Mozart symphony meant safe passage north was available. Haydn indicated delayed departure due to increased patrols. Beethoven signaled emergency: someone had been captured or a safe house compromised. Abolitionists attending concerts received information through musical selections that appeared to be standard classical programming. By 1845, the network had expanded beyond Lucian's direct management. He'd trained 12 other free black musicians in the operational model. Each managed their own smaller ensembles, creating a distributed system that couldn't be disabled by capturing any single person. If Lucien were arrested, 11 other concert series would continue operating. These ensemble leaders met quarterly at abolitionist gatherings, ostensibly discussing musical technique and repertoire. Actually, they coordinated routes, shared intelligence about slave catcher activity, and refined protocols. They documented their discussions in what appeared to be musical notation, Marginal notes on sheet music that, read correctly, described safe house locations, contact procedures, emergency contingencies. In March 1846, Lucian received urgent message from Frederick Douglass, the most prominent black abolitionist in America. Douglass was organizing a speaking tour through Pennsylvania and wanted to meet. They met in Philadelphia on March 18, 1846. Douglass was 38, Lucian 22. Douglass had achieved national prominence through his autobiography and anti-slavery speeches. Lucian operated invisibly, deliberately avoiding public attention. "I've heard about your concerts," Douglass said in the private room of an abolitionist's home. "I've heard they do more than entertain." Lucian measured his response carefully. Douglass was famous, which meant visible, which meant monitored. But he was also trustworthy. His commitment to abolition was unquestionable. "Music serves multiple purposes," Lucian said. "It preserves culture. It generates income. It provides cover for movement." Douglass smiled slightly. "How many people has your cover moved?" 63 as of last month, placed in employment across 8 cities. None recaptured. "That's extraordinary operational security. How do you maintain it?" Lucian explained the initial system, the rotating ensemble membership, the coded musical programs, the distributed leadership structure, the legitimate financial records that could withstand investigation. Douglass listened intently. "You've built something I can't," he finally said. "My work requires visibility, public speeches, published writings, documented resistance. That makes me constantly watched. But your network operates below official notice. Authorities see concerts, not revolution." "Visibility and invisibility are both necessary," Lucian said. "Your speeches change minds. My concerts move bodies. Different tactics, same goal. I want to coordinate our efforts. My speaking tours attract attention. Abolitionists, journalists, curious observers. That attention could benefit your network. If I schedule speeches in cities where your ensemble performs, my presence draws crowds. Some attend my lectures, others attend your concerts. Both audiences leave with their work done, never realizing they've participated in coordinated operation." Over the next 3 months, they developed synchronized programming. When Douglass spoke in Rochester, Lucian's ensemble performed there 2 days later. Abolitionist audiences attended both events, creating legitimate reason for the same philanthropic donors to be present repeatedly in the same city. Those donors funded both Douglass's speaking tours and Lucian's concert series, multiplying resources available for Underground Railroad operations. The coordination proved extraordinarily effective. Between June 1846 and December 1847, synchronized Douglass-Lucian events facilitated movement of 93 people to freedom. Douglass's speeches generated publicity and donations. Lucian's concerts provided logistical cover for actual relocations. But success created new challenges. As the network grew, so did the risk of discovery. In November 1847, slave catchers arrested a woman in Philadelphia who'd been helped by Lucian's network 3 months earlier. Under interrogation, she mentioned attending a concert shortly after arriving in Philadelphia. Investigators began asking questions about musical performances and black musicians traveling through northern cities. Lucian received warning on November 23, 1847. Underground Railroad contacts had learned that authorities in 3 states were examining concert programs, trying to identify patterns. The invisible network was becoming visible. Lucian made immediate strategic adjustment. For 6 months, the traveling harmonic ensemble suspended operations. Publicly, Lucian announced he was accepting position as resident music instructor at a Boston preparatory school. Other ensemble leaders did the same, took teaching positions, reduced travel, maintained only local performance schedules. Underground Railroad contacts continued operations through other cover methods: domestic worker hiring services, church congregation transfers, traveling merchant operations. The concert network went dormant, waiting until investigative attention shifted elsewhere. During those 6 months, Lucian focused on documentation. He'd been keeping operational journals since 1842, but now he systematized the records. He created master ledgers tracking every person helped, their origin points, destination cities, new identities, employment secured. He documented every ensemble member, every concert venue, every donation received, every safe house used. He also created insurance against loss. Multiple copies of critical documents were distributed to trusted contacts in different cities. If one archive was seized, others would survive. The documentation was encrypted, written in musical notation that appeared to be composition sketches but actually recorded names, dates, locations. Only trained musicians familiar with both standard notation and Lucian's coded modifications could read it. By May 1848, investigative pressure had eased. Slave catchers had moved on to other targets. Concert operations resumed, but with enhanced security. Lucian implemented new protocols. Ensemble members never traveled together on public transportation. Lodging was always arranged through abolitionist contacts, never commercial hotels. Financial records were kept in triplicate, with copies stored in 3 states. The resumed operations proved more effective than before. Having refined procedures during the suspension, the network operated with increased efficiency. Between June 1848 and December 1850, Lucian's network facilitated relocation of 147 people. None were recaptured. No ensemble members were arrested. The operation remained below official detection despite moving larger numbers than ever before. In 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, dramatically increasing federal support for slave catchers and imposing harsh penalties on anyone assisting escaped enslaved people. Many Underground Railroad operators suspended activities, considering the new law too dangerous to defy. Lucian convened emergency meeting of ensemble leaders in Boston on November 4, 1850. 12 musicians gathered in the basement of Charles Street African Methodist Episcopal Church, ostensibly for hymnal rehearsal. Actually, they were deciding whether to continue operations under dramatically increased legal risk. "The new law changes everything," said Marcus Williams, who'd managed ensemble operations in Philadelphia for 3 years. "Federal marshals can now arrest anyone suspected of aiding fugitives. We could all face prison." "We were already breaking laws," Lucian pointed out. "This just makes existing violations more aggressively enforced. Our operational security hasn't changed. We're either detectable or we're not. The law doesn't make us more visible." "But the penalties are worse," another leader added. 6 months in prison, $1,000 fine. That's ruinous." "Being enslaved is more ruinous," Lucian said quietly. "The people we help don't have option to suspend assistance because it's become more dangerous for us. We either continue or admit we were only willing to help when personal risk was minimal." The room fell silent. These were free black men who'd never been enslaved, taking significant personal risk to help others escape bondage. The question was how much risk they were willing to accept. "I propose enhanced security measures instead of suspension," Lucian continued. "We already use initials, coded programs, rotating membership. We add additional protocols, all communication through intermediaries, no direct contact between ensemble leaders and relocated people after placement, financial records kept deliberately generic, educational programming instead of specific names or services." "That makes us harder to investigate," Williams said slowly. "But if we are investigated, it also makes us harder to defend. Vague records look deliberately evasive." "They do," Lucian agreed. "But vague records are also harder to use as evidence. Prosecution requires proving we specifically aided specific fugitives on specific dates. Generic financial records make specific proof difficult." After 4 hours of discussion, the group voted. 10-2 in favor of continuing operations with enhanced security. The 2 dissenting votes were respected. Those leaders withdrew from network involvement without judgment. Their ensembles transitioned to purely musical activity. The remaining 10 leaders intensified operations. Between 1851 and 1860, despite increased federal enforcement, Lucian's network moved 421 people to freedom. Enhanced security protocols proved effective. 0 arrests of ensemble members, 0 recaptures of relocated people. The financial scale grew accordingly. Total documented revenue from concerts between 1842 and 1860, $143,265. Of that amount, $127,940 was dispersed to educational programming, the coded term for Underground Railroad operations. Concert operations were profitable because European philanthropists paid premium prices to attend performances featuring black classical musicians playing innovative fusion compositions. That wealth funded infrastructure supporting systematic liberation. By 1853, Lucien commissioned the daguerreotype photograph that would eventually be discovered in 1987. He was 30 years old, had facilitated freedom for hundreds of people, and recognized the historical significance of documenting what he'd built. The photograph showed him in formal attire with violin, looking directly at camera with expression that conveyed exactly what he intended. This is evidence of genius white supremacy denies exists. The photograph also served strategic purpose. By 1853, Lucien was well established in Boston's musical community. Having a formal portrait was expected of successful musicians. The daguerreotype provided legitimate explanation for why a known black musician might possess expensive formal portrait. It was professional credential, not evidence of suspicious wealth. In 1854, Lucien received unexpected visitor in Boston. Marie Lucien, his daughter, had been born in 1843 to Elise Beaumont, a free black woman Lucien had met through abolitionist circles. Marie Lucien was 11 years old, extraordinarily talented, and beginning serious musical training. Elise and Lucien had never married. Both agreed their revolutionary work took priority over domestic arrangements. But they co-parented effectively, and Lucien was deeply involved in his daughter's life and education. "She wants to learn the hidden rhythms," Elise told him during a private conversation in his Boston apartment. "She hears them in your compositions. She knows there's something beneath the surface." Lucien had deliberately not taught Marie Lucien about the Underground Railroad work. She was too young, and knowledge would put her at risk. But musical knowledge was different. The African traditions, the fusion techniques, the documentation methods, those could be shared safely. He began teaching her the same way his father had taught him: European classical structure as the framework, African rhythmic complexity as the soul, written notation as preservation against erasure. By age 13, Marie Lucien could play compositions that synthesized traditions with sophistication beyond most adult musicians. In 1857, Lucien arranged for her to study in Paris. European conservatories would train her at level unavailable in United States, where even free black musicians faced discrimination. She traveled with letters of introduction from prominent Boston abolitionists, entered Paris Conservatoire, and began training that would eventually make her one of Europe's most celebrated opera singers. Before she left, Lucien gave her copies of his most important compositions, the ones documenting African traditions, analyzing fusion techniques, explaining the musical theory underlying his life's work. "This is your inheritance," he told her. "Not wealth, knowledge. The music our ancestors created, adapted, preserved. If I die, these compositions prove what I've done. They prove we were never what white supremacy claimed we were." She understood. At 15, she was already aware of the stakes. She took the compositions to Paris, had them professionally copied, distributed them to trusted musicologist contacts Lucien had developed over 15 years of European correspondence. When Lucien's archive was discovered in 1987, researchers found evidence that copies of his compositions had been circulating in European academic circles since the 1860s. Marie Lucien had fulfilled exactly the role her father intended: preserving evidence, distributing knowledge, ensuring the work couldn't be erased. By 1860, as Civil War approached, Lucien's network had facilitated freedom for 487 documented people over 18 years. The network employed 43 ensemble musicians across 12 cities. Total concert revenue exceeded $200,000. The operational security had prevented any successful prosecution, any confirmed recapture, any public exposure of the underground infrastructure. When war began in April 1861, Underground Railroad operations became simultaneously more dangerous and less necessary. Enslaved people could now flee to Union lines and claim protection as contraband of war. The concert network had effectively accomplished its primary mission. It had moved hundreds to freedom and established model for cultural cover enabling revolutionary activity. But Lucien's work wasn't finished. War created new opportunities and new needs. The story would continue through emancipation and beyond, evolving from underground liberation network to public institution preserving black musical heritage and supporting economic development of freed people. In 1865, at age 42, Lucian would face his most important decision, whether to reveal the network's history or keep it hidden to protect people who remained vulnerable despite legal emancipation. That decision would determine whether his life's work would be known to his contemporaries or discovered 122 years later by archaeologists breaking through a wall in Boston, Massachusetts, April 9, 1865. The day Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, ending the Civil War. Lucian Gaines stood at the window of his apartment on Beacon Hill, watching celebration unfold in the streets below. Church bells rang across the city. People embraced strangers. Crowds gathered outside newspaper offices, reading posted bulletins announcing the war's end. After 4 years of devastating conflict, the United States had survived. And more importantly, slavery had been abolished. Lucian was 41 years old. He'd spent 23 years operating an underground network that had moved 487 documented people to freedom. He'd built a distributed system spanning 12 cities, employed 43 musicians, generated over $287,000 in concert revenue, and maintained perfect operational security. 0 arrests, 0 recaptures, 0 public exposure of the network's true purpose. Now, the network's primary mission no longer existed. Enslaved people didn't need secret relocation systems. They were legally free. The war had accomplished through military force what the Underground Railroad had accomplished through covert operations. Elise Beaumont entered the apartment carrying newspapers. She was 53 now, her hair showing gray, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had first attracted Lucian 22 years earlier. Though they'd never married, they'd been partners in every meaningful sense, raising their daughter Marie-Lucienne together, coordinating abolitionist work, maintaining the cover operations that protected the network. "They're calling it the greatest day in American history," she said, setting the papers on his desk. "Every front page is proclaiming the death of slavery." "The death of legal slavery," Lucian corrected. "The ideology survives. The economic structures survive. We've won a war, not changed minds." He wasn't being pessimistic, just realistic. 4 years of observing how the North treated free black people had taught him that legal emancipation wouldn't automatically produce social equality. Boston's black community still faced discrimination in employment, housing, education. Freedom was necessary, but not sufficient. Elise sat in the chair across from him. "What happens to the network now?" It was the question Lucienne had been wrestling with for weeks. The Traveling Harmonic Ensemble had suspended concert operations in 1863, when Civil War made travel too dangerous and unpredictable. Most ensemble members had transitioned to other work, teaching music, performing locally, some joining military bands that accompanied Union regiments. The distributed network had effectively dissolved during the war years, but the documentation remained. Lucian's journals, financial ledgers, coded musical compositions, correspondence with Frederick Douglass and other abolitionists, lists of safe houses, records of every person relocated between 1842 and 1863. 23 years of evidence documenting one of the most successful underground railroad operations in American history. "We have a choice," Lucian said slowly, organizing his thoughts as he spoke. "We can reveal the network's history now, publish the documents, tell the story, claim credit for what we accomplished. Or we can hide everything and let the work remain invisible." "Why would we hide it?" Elise asked immediately. "You've earned recognition for this work. The people you helped deserve to have their liberation documented. This is important history." Lucian had expected that response. She was right, morally, but he wasn't sure she was right strategically. "Consider what revealing the network means," he said. "Publishing the documents would identify everyone involved, the 487 people we relocated, their current locations, their new identities, their employment. It would expose safe house operators who continue living in border states. It would reveal which prominent northern families donated money, knowing it funded Underground Railroad operations." He paused, letting the implications settle. "The war is over, but many Confederates aren't defeated. They're angry. Revealing our network gives them a list of targets: former enslaved people who escaped, abolitionists who helped them, families who funded their relocation. We'd be handing enemies detailed intelligence about people who remain vulnerable. Elise frowned, understanding the concern but not entirely accepting it. So we accomplished something extraordinary, and we're supposed to hide it to protect people who might be threatened by former Confederates? Yes, Lucian said simply. We protected these people by moving them to freedom. We don't stop protecting them just because slavery is legally abolished. Their safety remains our responsibility. For how long? 10 years? 20? Forever? Until revealing the truth wouldn't endanger them. I don't know when that is. Maybe a generation from now. Maybe longer. They sat in silence, both recognizing the weight of what they were discussing. Lucian had documented everything specifically so the work could be preserved and eventually recognized. Hiding it indefinitely contradicted that purpose. But revealing it prematurely could harm the very people the network had been designed to protect. There's another consideration, Lucian added. Our network succeeded because it operated invisibly. We used cultural cover, concerts, musical education, to hide revolutionary activity. That's a valuable model for future resistance. If we publish everything now, we teach authorities how to identify similar operations. We make it harder for others to use cultural work as cover for activism. Elise absorbed that. She'd been involved in abolitionist organizing long enough to think strategically about resistance tactics. Making their methods public would help historians, but would also help those who wanted to suppress future movements. You're saying we sacrifice recognition to preserve operational knowledge for people who might need it later? Yes. The network's most valuable contribution isn't the 487 people we relocated, though that matters enormously. It's the proof that sustained invisible resistance is possible, that cultural institutions can serve revolutionary purposes, that documentation can preserve resistance even when participants remain anonymous. He gestured to the stack of journals on his desk. These documents prove what we did. Someday, they'll show that enslaved people and their allies operated sophisticated networks that white supremacy never acknowledged existed. But they can only prove that if they survive. And they can only survive if we hide them where they won't be found by people who destroy them. Over the next 6 weeks, Lucian and Elise debated the decision repeatedly. They consulted with a few trusted contacts: Marcus Williams in Philadelphia, 2 other former ensemble leaders in New York, a lawyer who'd defended Underground Railroad operators. Everyone understood both sides of the argument. Frederick Douglass, when consulted privately, initially favored publication. The world needs to know what Black people accomplished through this work, he argued during a visit to Boston in May 1865. For too long, our resistance has been erased or attributed to white abolitionists. This is evidence of our agency, our intelligence, our organization. But after reviewing some of Lucian's documents, Douglass reconsidered. The lists of names and locations, these are dangerous in the wrong hands. I wouldn't publish those, but perhaps the operational methods, the financial systems, the coordination techniques, that knowledge has value. Partial publication creates partial protection, Lucian countered. Anyone investigating the operational methods would eventually identify participants. If we're going to hide this, we hide all of it. By early June, Lucian had made his decision. The documentation would be hidden, sealed away until a time when revealing it wouldn't endanger anyone involved. He didn't know how long that would take. Decades, perhaps a century. But the work was worth preserving, even if it meant his generation would never receive credit for it. The next question was where to hide it. Lucian considered multiple options. Bank vaults were too insecure. Banks failed, records were sold, authorities could compel access. Giving the documents to abolitionist organizations was too risky. Organizations changed leadership, suffered political pressure, sometimes dissolved. Trusting family members meant burdening his daughter Marie-Lucienne with a secret that could put her at risk. The ideal hiding place needed to be secure, permanent, but eventually discoverable. It couldn't be somewhere that might be destroyed during renovations or construction. It needed to be in a building likely to survive for generations, and it needed to be somewhere Lucian could access without arousing suspicion. Mechanics Hall on Huntington Avenue fit those criteria. The building had been constructed in 1864 as a concert venue and meeting space. Lucian had performed there multiple times. His presence in the building was unremarkable. The hall was architecturally significant enough that major renovations were unlikely in the near future. And most importantly, Lucian had befriended the building's maintenance supervisor, a man sympathetic to abolitionist causes who owed Lucian several favors. In July 1865, Lucian commissioned a large wooden trunk from a furniture maker in Boston's black community. He specified oak construction, iron hinges, waterproof interior lining. The trunk measured 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, 18 inches deep, large enough to hold all his journals, financial ledgers, musical compositions, correspondence, and concert programs. Over 3 weeks, he organized the documentation into deliberate stacks. Stack 1, musical compositions, showing fusion of African and European traditions. These were his most important artistic contribution, evidence that black musicians were innovating new forms decades before jazz would be officially recognized. 200 pages of original compositions, meticulously notated, annotated with marginal notes explaining rhythmic theory and cultural origins. Stack 2, letters and correspondence. 16 pieces exchanged with abolitionists, other ensemble leaders, donors, and Underground Railroad contacts, all signed with initials only. Content carefully worded to be incriminating enough to prove the network's existence, but vague enough to maintain deniability if discovered prematurely. Stack 3, his personal journal. 340 pages spanning 1823 to 1891 would eventually fill it, but in 1865 he'd completed entries through the war years. This was the comprehensive narrative: his childhood in New Orleans, his escape, the establishment of the network, operational details, philosophical reflections on resistance and preservation. Stack 4, concert programs. 23 printed programs from venues across the Northeast, documenting the public face of the operation. Each listed performers by initials, each marked specific dates and locations that could be correlated with documented Underground Railroad activity. Stack 5, financial ledgers. Complete accounting of $287,450 in concert revenue and $259,680 in educational disbursements, the coded phrase for Underground Railroad funding. The precision of the accounting was deliberate. It proved the network operated with professional sophistication, not amateur enthusiasm. Stack 6, the 1853 daguerreotype. The photograph of Lucian with violin, formal attire, direct gaze. On the back, he'd engraved, LG, Boston, 1853, the truth preserved. This was evidence of identity, linking the documents to a specific person who existed, who had resources, who had achieved enough professional standing to commission expensive portraiture. He sealed the trunk in early August 1865. Before closing it, he added one final document, a letter dated August 1st, 1865. To whoever discovers this archive, you are reading evidence of systematic resistance to American slavery conducted between 1842 and 1863 through the operation of concert tours disguising Underground Railroad activity. The network relocated 487 documented individuals from slavery to freedom across 12 northern cities. No participant was ever arrested. No relocated person was ever recaptured. I am Lucian Gaines, born enslaved in Louisiana, 1823, escaped 1840, arrived Boston, 1842. I built this network because cultural work provides cover for revolutionary activity. Music generates revenue, creates mobility, appears politically neutral. These advantages can serve liberation. I seal this archive not because I'm ashamed of what we accomplished, but because revealing it would endanger people we protected. Former enslaved people living under new identities. Safe house operators still residing in border states. Abolitionists who face retaliation from defeated Confederates seeking vengeance. These documents should remain sealed until their discovery wouldn't threaten anyone involved. I cannot know when that time will be. Perhaps when I write this in 1865, legal emancipation seems sufficient. But I suspect not. I suspect true safety requires not just legal freedom, but social transformation that takes generations. When you read this, If enough time has passed that enslaved people's descendants no longer face systematic oppression, then this archive serves as historical evidence. If that time hasn't arrived, then seal this archive again and protect it. The truth exists whether or not it's spoken aloud. This documentation proves we existed, we resisted, we succeeded. Someday, it will prove that to others. Until then, it proves it to us. Lucian Gaines, musical director, The Traveling Harmonic Ensemble, Boston, Massachusetts, August 1st, 1865. On August 7th, 1865, Lucian met with James Richardson, the maintenance supervisor at Mechanics Hall. They descended to the basement carrying the trunk. In the east wall, Richardson had prepared a hollow space between brick layers, originally designed as ventilation gap but unused. The space measured 8 feet wide, 6 feet deep, 10 feet tall, perfect for concealment. They positioned the trunk inside, then Richardson began bricking over the opening. Layer by layer, new bricks sealed the hidden chamber. When finished, the wall appeared solid, continuous, indistinguishable from surrounding masonry. Only someone deliberately demolishing the wall would discover what lay behind it. "How long you think it'll stay hidden?" Richardson asked as they examined the completed work. "As long as it needs to," Lucian replied. He'd built the network to operate invisibly. Now the documentation would remain invisible too. Someday, perhaps decades from now, perhaps a century, someone would break through that wall and discover what they'd accomplished. Until then, the work would speak for itself through its absence. The 487 people living free lives under new identities. The black-owned businesses established with network funding. The musicians trained in fusion techniques who'd pass that knowledge to future generations. Lucian climbed the basement stairs knowing he'd completed the work fully. He'd liberated people, documented the process, and preserved the evidence for a future that might finally be ready to understand it. He returned to his apartment, to Elise, to a Boston celebrating emancipation while still practicing discrimination. He continued teaching music, performing occasionally, training younger musicians in the traditions his parents had taught him. He lived another 26 years, dying November 12, 1891 at age 68. His obituary in the Boston Globe described him as a respected music instructor and performer who contributed significantly to Boston's cultural life. No mention of Underground Railroad operations. No mention of 487 people relocated to freedom. No mention of revolutionary work disguised as cultural activity. The network remained invisible, just as he'd intended. On March 17, 1987, 122 years after Lucien sealed the archive, Roberto Martinez's sledgehammer broke through the wall. The trunk was discovered, the documentation emerged, and the truth that Lucien had preserved finally found the audience ready to understand it. The story that began with a child learning rhythm in Louisiana quarters continued through decades of invisible resistance and concluded with deliberate concealment, was finally completed by its discovery. Lucian had built something designed to outlast him, hidden until America was ready, or at least more ready, to acknowledge what black people had accomplished, while white supremacy denied they were capable of accomplishing anything at all. The archive survived because Lucian understood a fundamental truth about resistance. Sometimes the most powerful action is to preserve evidence and wait. The work itself was revolution. The documentation was insurance against erasure. The concealment was protection for the vulnerable. And the eventual discovery was validation that the right moment does eventually arrive, not perfectly, but sufficiently. In 1987, historians, musicologists, and archivists examined Lucien's documents and recognized what he'd created: evidence of genius, proof of organization,